The night sky above London wasn't black, it was bleeding. Flames climbed higher than church spires, licking the smoke like hungry fingers. Inside a barbed wire compound miles away, German prisoners watched through the slits of their barracks. They had bombed these streets once. Now, through the orange glow, they were watching the city they'd tried to destroy, still burning, still breathing. One of them whispered, "That's not a city. That's a heart refusing to die." No one answered, because deep down, every man there felt the same thing. They weren't sure anymore who the enemy really was. The camp at Shropshire was quiet that winter, but not peaceful. Mud clung to boots, cold bit through the tin walls, and every breath hung in the air like smoke from an invisible gun. For most of the men, silence was worse than punishment. Silence left room for thought. Kurt Vogel, once a Luftwaffe engineer, spent his nights staring at the frost forming on the window. He used to design machines that turned cities to ash. Now, all he could design were excuses for survival. They'd heard rumors of London, that the bombings had stopped, that whole districts had burned to dust. But rumors were like ghosts, loud at night, gone by morning. The guards spoke little. When they did, their words were clipped, tired. Breakfast, work detail, back in line. Every sound carried threat. Boots on gravel, gates creaking, the hum of distant planes. Kurt kept thinking, if they knew who I was, would they feed me at all? One evening, the sirens sounded again, not for an air raid, but a fire. From the hills beyond the camp, a faint orange shimmer rose into the night. The prisoners gathered at the fence, shivering. "London," someone murmured. "Still burning." They stood there, a line of ghosts watching another world bleed light. And for the first time since capture, Kurt felt something colder than fear, shame. We built this, he thought, and now we can't look away. But that night, something changed. By late January, the frost had settled into everything. The beds, the bread, even the men's bones. The camp doctor said it built character. But Kurt knew it only built silence. Every morning began the same. Boots hitting the frozen ground, breath fogging in the dim light, the smell of boiled cabbage clinging to the air. The guards watched, expressionless, not cruel, just weary, like men who'd run out of energy to hate. Then one morning, the trucks came earlier than usual. No soldiers inside, just crates, stamped with a red cross and a single word, London. The men whispered as the boxes were opened. Inside were blankets, soap, tins of milk, and, unbelievably, books. The guard sergeant, a tall man with windburned cheeks, read the list aloud. "Donations from the city," he said. "Civilians. For you lot." No one spoke. The words didn't fit. Kurt stared at the supplies, confused. "Civilians?" he muttered under his breath. "From where?" The sergeant looked up. "From London. The ones you bombed." The camp felt utterly still. For a moment, the air itself felt wrong, heavy with something neither side had a name for. A few men laughed nervously. Others turned away, their hands tightening around their cups. Kurt stood frozen. London, he thought. They should hate us. But the soap was real. The blankets were warm. The milk was sweet. That night, unable to sleep, he walked to the fence. In the distance, beyond the dark hills, a faint glow still rose from the horizon. The burned scars of London, refusing to fade. He could almost smell it, the same smoke he once helped create. Now it mixed with the scent of bread from the camp kitchen, and something inside him twisted. Behind him, another prisoner approached, a mechanic named Dieter. "They send us gifts now," he whispered bitterly. "What do they want in return?" Kurt didn't answer, because he didn't know. The next morning, a British corporal arrived at the gate carrying a radio. He placed it on a table near the barracks and said, "You're allowed this for 1 hour a day. Might help you remember the world's still turning." When the dial caught a signal, the camp filled with the BBC's clipped, calm English. It was the news, not propaganda, not shouting, just facts. Then came a woman's voice, bright but trembling. "Firefighters continue their work across East London. Morale remains high. The city stands." Kurt swallowed hard. He imagined those words passing over the same ruins his bombs had made. Later, he found a scrap of paper and wrote quietly in the margin of his notebook. "They should hate us, but they send us warmth instead. What kind of strength forgives the fire that destroyed it?" He closed the notebook, because even thinking that, even writing it, felt dangerous. But that morning, as he watched the frost melting from the barbed wire, Kurt understood something new. The war outside the fence was still raging. But inside, something even stranger had begun, a kind of mercy he didn't know how to survive. By February, the frost had started to retreat. Thin streaks of mud appeared on the paths between the barracks, and for the first time, the prisoners worked without gloves. The days grew longer, but not easier. The camp commander had begun allowing work parties, small groups of German POWs sent to nearby farms to help repair fences, dig ditches, or gather firewood. Kurt was one of them. He expected scorn, maybe spit, maybe stones. But the farmer who met them, a quiet man with cracked hands and a limp, simply nodded toward the field. You'll find the spades there. Keep your coats on. The wind bites harder than I do. No insults. No shouting. Just work. The rhythm of the day numbed everything. The scrape of spades, the hiss of breath, the crow calls from far-off hedgerows. By noon, his hands were bleeding from blisters. At lunch, the farmer's wife brought out a kettle and thick slices of bread. She didn't speak, just placed the food on the stone wall and walked away. But Kurt noticed something impossible: butter. Real butter. Yellow, soft, melting on the bread. No one touched it at first. It felt like a test. Finally, one man, Carl, the youngest, muttered, "If it's poison, I'd rather die tasting butter." They laughed, quietly, almost like men again. That afternoon, the farmer's wife returned. This time she spoke. "My son was in London during the Blitz," she said, her voice steady but tired. "He used to say the fire sounded like thunder that never stopped." Kurt lowered his gaze. "I'm sorry." She looked at him, studying his face, the gaunt cheeks, the hollow eyes. Then she nodded. "Maybe you are," and walked away. That night, Kurt couldn't sleep. He sat by the barack window, staring at the far-off horizon where London's faint orange halo still bled into the clouds. The others were snoring softly, their bodies wrapped in thin blankets. Kurt pulled out his small notebook, the one the guards never searched, and began to write. "We built machines that turned cities to dust. Now I hold a spade instead of a wrench. It feels heavier. They feed us bread made from their own rations. They have every right to hate us, yet they don't. Maybe that's what victory looks like." When he finished, he tore the page out and hid it beneath the floorboard. He didn't want anyone to read it. Not the guards, not the other prisoners, not even himself. The next morning, when they returned to the farm, something unexpected happened. The farmer's wife handed Kurt a small cup of tea before he started work. "Londoners drink it this way," she said quietly. "Strong. No sugar." He nodded. "Thank you." She hesitated, then replied, "You're welcome." The sound of that phrase, in English, from her mouth to his, hit him harder than any punishment. It wasn't kindness he feared now. It was the way it made him remember he was human. And as the days passed, that became the hardest part of captivity, not the fences, not the cold, but the unbearable warmth of forgiveness. March arrived with muddy boots and rain that never seemed to stop. The men worked longer hours now, hauling timber, fixing barns, planting early crops. For the first time since their capture, they were allowed to write home. Each prisoner received one small sheet of paper, thin, gray, stamped with the words "examined by military censor." They stared at it like it was gold. Kurt sat at his bunk for hours before touching his pencil. How do you explain captivity without sounding broken? How do you say you're treated kindly by the very people you were told were monsters? He began carefully, like a man disarming a bomb. "My dearest Elsa, I am alive. The guards are strict, but fair. We work every day. We are fed, even when food is scarce for them. Sometimes they let us listen to the radio. London still stands. The city we destroyed refuses to die." He stopped there, unsure whether the truth was too heavy to send. He stared at the half-written letter until the candle burned low, then folded it anyway. Better to send an incomplete truth than a complete lie. 2 weeks later, he received an envelope in return. Thin, fragile, bearing the uneven handwriting he knew by heart. "Kurt, I'm grateful you live. I heard about London on the wireless. I cried for them. For us. For what we've become. I used to pray for victory. Now I pray for mercy, for both sides. Don't lose the part of you that feels sorrow. That part might save you." He read it 3 times, then tucked it beneath his shirt. It was the first warmth he'd felt in months. That evening, when the guards gathered in the canteen for tea, one of them, Harris, the corporal with the kind eyes, called over to the prisoners. News from home. Kurt hesitated, then nodded. Yes. My wife says she prays for mercy now, not victory. Harris leaned back in his chair. A wise woman. He sipped his tea. We all thought victory would make the world better. But all it's done is fill it with graves. Kurt looked at him. This enemy, who spoke like an old friend. How do you go back? He asked softly. After you've seen what war really is? Harris didn't answer. He just stared into his cup, as if the answer might be floating somewhere in the tea. That night, the radio played again. Not news this time, but music. A soft female voice, trembling slightly. We'll meet again. The prisoners listened in silence. One man wiped his eyes. Another whispered, she sounds like she's singing to ghosts. Kurt closed his eyes. In that moment, the camp didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a confession booth. A place where men who'd seen too much came to remember what it meant to be human. When the song ended, he whispered to himself, if this is what defeat feels like, maybe it's the beginning of something better. Outside, rain pattered softly against the tin roofs, and the faint glow of London flickered once more on the horizon, steady, defiant, alive. By late spring, the air changed. The cold wind that had cut through their coats was gone, replaced by the earthy smell of tilled soil and smoke from distant farms. The war still thundered across Europe, but in Shropshire, something quieter had begun, a strange kind of rebuilding. The British authorities started assigning POWs to local labor projects. Roads, fences, farm roofs, work that kept them busy, but also, somehow, made them useful again. When Kurt first stepped beyond the wire without an escort, it felt unreal. No rifles, no shouting, just the creak of the gate and the open road ahead. Their first task was clearing rubble in a nearby village hit by stray bombs. Half the houses were gone, the church steeple blackened, and the air still carried the faint metallic scent of ash. Kurt's hands shook when he lifted the first brick. He'd handled destruction before, but never repair. A local woman passed by, pushing a cart of laundry. She stopped when she saw the Germans. Her eyes hardened for a moment, then softened. Mind the glass there, she said quietly. My children play here sometimes. Kurt nodded. It was the first time a civilian had spoken to him without hate. By noon, the men worked in silence, moving stone after stone. A group of children stood nearby, watching, curiosity outweighing fear. One boy pointed to a charred doorframe. That was our school, he said proudly, as if it still existed. Kurt glanced at the twisted metal and managed a faint smile. It will be again, he said. The boy nodded, as though the promise were a law of nature. Later, when the prisoners returned to camp, the guards didn't bother counting every head. Trust, fragile, invisible, was growing like grass through broken pavement. That evening, Harris stopped by the work shed where Kurt was repairing a wheelbarrow. You're good with your hands, he said. Engineer, right? Kurt nodded. Harris leaned against the doorway. Funny, you built machines that took lives. Now you're fixing the ones that carry food. He smiled faintly. Guess that's balance, in a way. Kurt looked down at the wheelbarrow, at his own dirt-stained fingers. I don't know if it balances, he said quietly, but maybe it keeps me from sinking. A week later, the village priest invited the work detail to Sunday service. No one forced them. No one even expected them to go. But they went anyway. 5 German prisoners sitting at the back of a half-ruined church, listening to an English prayer for peace. The priest's voice trembled. Lord, forgive our enemies, for they are men, not monsters. Kurt's eyes burned. The words didn't sting. They healed. When the service ended, the villagers filed past. Some nodded. A little girl left a single daffodil on the pew beside him. He looked at the yellow petals, bright, fragile, alive, and thought, it's the first thing I've been given that wasn't rations. That night, he wrote in his notebook again. They let us rebuild what we broke. Perhaps that's what forgiveness looks like. Not words, but work. Outside, the stars shone above the wire, quiet, steady, and somehow closer than they'd ever been. The news arrived on a Sunday morning. The guards didn't shout. They didn't ring bells or fire guns into the sky. They just walked through the camp with unreadable faces, whispering to each other. By noon, everyone knew. Germany had surrendered. The war, the thing that had built their world, broken it, and given it purpose, was over. No one cheered. No one cried. They just stood there, unsure what to do with their hands. For the first time in years, no one was giving orders. No one was the enemy. Kurt sat on his bunk, staring at the wooden floor. The word surrender echoed in his head, heavy as iron. It didn't sound like relief. It sounded like a funeral. Across the room, Carl, the youngest among them, broke the silence. "So that's it?" he asked. "We can go home?" No one answered. Because home was a word none of them trusted anymore. 2 days later, the camp commander called an assembly. He stood on a small platform, his uniform immaculate, his voice calm. "Gentlemen," he began, "the war is over. You will remain here until repatriation arrangements are made. There will be no punishment, no violence, no revenge. The fighting has stopped. For all of us." For a moment, the only sound was wind rustling the flags above them. Kurt glanced toward the gate. Open, yet guarded. Freedom, visible but unreachable. Later that day, Harris approached him by the fence. He looked older, more tired, but there was a faint smile on his face. "Well," he said, "you made it." Kurt gave a small nod. "So did you." Harris looked down, rubbing the back of his neck. "You'll be heading home soon, I expect. Back to the ruins." Kurt's throat tightened. "If there's still a home left." The guard didn't answer immediately. Then he said softly, "You'll build one. You're good at rebuilding." Kurt smiled faintly. "You taught me how." They stood there for a while, two men divided by wire that no longer meant anything. Finally, Harris extended his hand through the fence. Kurt hesitated, then shook it. It was the first time he had touched a British hand since the war began. Warm, firm, real. "Take care of yourself, Kurt," Harris said. "If you ever come back this way, bring your wife. London's better in the spring." Kurt's voice was quiet. "I'll tell her that the fire didn't win." Harris nodded. "No, it didn't. Not in the end." That night, the camp was eerily still. No curfew whistle. No barking dogs. Only a distant train, carrying someone home. Kurt sat outside the barracks, notebook in hand. "The war is over," he wrote. "But I don't know what peace feels like. Maybe it's this, an ache without a target. The men here aren't my comrades anymore. They're just people who survived the same storm. Maybe that's all we ever were." He closed the notebook and looked up at the sky. It was dark, endless, but for the first time, not burning. He whispered, almost to himself, "Perhaps surviving is its own kind of punishment and its own kind of grace." The next morning, the gates opened. No one ran. They just walked, slow, uncertain, blinking into the sunlight of a world that no longer needed them to fight. When Kurt finally crossed back into Germany, he almost didn't recognize it. The train rolled through valleys that had once been villages, now only bricks and twisted metal. The air smelled of damp ash and burned paper. He pressed his forehead against the window. Children played in the ruins, barefoot and thin, building castles out of stones that had once been homes. He envied them. How easily they pretended the world had always been this way. Berlin was worse. Blocks of silence where whole neighborhoods used to stand. He searched for familiar streets and found only empty shells. For weeks, he wandered the city looking for Elsa. When he finally found her, she was working at a soup kitchen run by volunteers, British and German together. She didn't recognize him at first. The years had carved both of them into strangers. When she did, she dropped the ladle and just stared. "Kurt." He nodded, unable to speak. She walked to him slowly, like approaching something fragile. Then she embraced him, burying her face against his shoulder. "I thought you were gone," she whispered. "I was," he said quietly. "But I came back." They stayed like that for a long time. No tears, just the deep, exhausted silence of two people who had run out of words. That winter, Kurt found work repairing train engines for the new government. He wrote in his notebook less now, not because he'd forgotten, but because the words no longer hurt to remember. Then, one morning in 1950, an envelope arrived with an English stamp. No return address, just a single line written on the back, for old time's sake. Inside was a photograph, London, seen from above. Whole, glowing, alive. On the back, a short message. "Told you it looks better in the spring. H." Kurt smiled. He didn't need the signature. He could almost hear Harris's voice, that dry English humor, the weariness hidden under decency. He showed the picture to Elsa. "Do you think we'll ever go there?" She touched the corner of the photo, her expression soft. "Maybe one day, when we've learned how to live again." That, one day, came a decade later. In 1960, Kurt and Elsa arrived in London as part of a reconciliation program. German veterans helping restore war memorials and hospitals. The city was different now. Brighter, louder, full of life. But beneath it, he could still feel the pulse of the past, the stubborn heartbeat that had refused to stop, even under fire. He stood by the River Thames at dusk, watching the lights ripple across the water. In the distance, St. Paul's Cathedral gleamed, the same dome that had survived the Blitz. He remembered seeing it in that old newspaper, framed by fire. Now it stood in gold and quiet dignity. He took out his last notebook, the same one from the camp, and wrote slowly. They said war would make men heroes. It only made us human. They said cities die when they burn. London proved them wrong. And when forgiveness came, it didn't shout. It poured tea. It shared bread. It smiled without reason. He closed the notebook and set it on the stone railing, letting the wind flip its pages. Elsa slipped her arm through his. "Are you ready to go?" she asked. He looked once more at the skyline, the smoke now replaced by evening fog. "Yes," he said softly. "It's still standing. That's all I needed to see." As they walked away, the bells of St. Paul's began to ring, clear, steady, unbroken. Kurt smiled faintly and whispered the words that had haunted and healed him for 20 years. War took everything, but humanity gave it back.